Hey, this is Al. We're in Philadelphia at the Kelly Writers House. It's November 8th, 2017, and we're really excited to talk about the aleatory poetry of chapter 9.2, week 9. But as a matter of fact, sitting to my left, and your right, if you're watching on the screen, is Erica Baum, the Erica Baum. Erica Baum herself. Erica Baum snaps for Erica Baum. There's Joe snapping in front of there. You go. Hi, Erica.
Hi.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Just so everybody knows, Erica's got a triple header today. At noon, we did a poem talk about 3 pieces from Dog Ear, 3 poems from Dog Ear. Now you're here to join us for the webcast, for the ModPo webcast, and then at 6 p.m. you and I are just going to have a conversation with a live audience, and this is great. Thank you for doing a triple header.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's so exciting. And Davey's here.
Hi, Al.
And Amber Rose is here.
Hey, hey.
So the two of them flanking us here are making excuses early. They have another thing they have to go to, but they didn't want to miss the beginning of this. So there's going to be a moment where they're going to head out, so presumably a moment where Zach focuses way in on me so they can't be seen sneaking out Al's nose. And schnoz is the better word. And Mandana is here, and at that point, Mandana will come up to the front table, and we're very excited about that. We have Zach, and we have Chris. And we have 484-352-2429, 484-352-2429. We're going to take just a couple of calls today, maybe 2, maybe 3. We have so much other stuff to talk about. And we're going to be giving away, Zach, we're going to be giving away copies of Illocality, which is Joe Massey's fantastic book from a couple of years ago. Joe, hi, Joe.
Hey, Al.
This was really like shortlisted for prizes, and it won a prize, and it's just like it was on all the lists that year. Wasn't that great?
It was awesome.
Yeah, and it had a great New York Times book review. Illocality, we have 2 copies, so the first caller and the second caller are going to get a copy of Illocality. Okay, so we have Lily here. Hello, Lily.
Hello.
Amaris Kachansky, hello.
Hi, Al.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good.
Good. That's great. It's good to see you. As always, Joe Massey is here. Hi, Joe. We already said hello, but hi. Joe's got his November hat on. That's very cool. And
cold.
What's that?
It's cold.
Yes, it is cold. And I loved, if you don't follow Joe's, tweets and also his Facebook posts, you just have to, because he's like he's my weather man, because he's always, the moods, they're seasonal moods. If you want precise weather, you talk to Lily Applebaum. If you want moods, you follow Joe on social media. And Erica Kaufman, hello.
Hi, Al.
Hey, so I want to get Amber Rose and Davey into the conversation before they have to leave, but just a couple of preliminaries. First of all, Irene Sola is a Catalan poet I met when I was in London. When we were in London, I went to the Whitechapel Gallery, and I ran into Oscar Holloway, whom I mentioned earlier. He was just there, a ModPo guy, also from Barcelona. There was this Barcelona, I think, actually, I may be wrong. I think he might be from Madrid. But anyway, I know that there was a Barcelona ModPo group a couple of years ago. And then 2 of them migrated to London, where they're both curators, gallerists at Whitechapel Gallery in London, in East London. And I met Irene, who was at the desk, and she told me about a book of poems that was coming out, her first book of poems, and she is a Catalan poet, so she writes in Catalan, but she's also translated, and I believe she may have done the translations herself. Sorry about that, I can't. Irene and Oscar Holloway, 2 ModPo people, did the translation. So I'm just sort of hawking this book, and it's really great. I read it last night, and I'll just quote. It's pretty, there's a lot of dad-daughter, this is complicated poems. Here's one of them that's maybe less complicated than others. My father combed my hair. His clumsy hands on those small things made my head move like a combine harvester. The damp wheat, beginning to rot, became fine and pulled me backwards, and my ponytail lasted until breakfast. It's a very complicated poem, and they're all like that, and it's great. So I hope it's called Beast. Second, there's a bunch of people who are doing mesostics this week, and here's a kind of modified mesostic that uses Al Filreis as the spine, and it's actually really modified. This is not so random, but it's Jacqueline Murphy, who's an active ModPoer this year, had my fill of lit after immersion at college. But the brilliant students at Penn made me fanatical the best. Al Filreis, there's a Mezostic, just cheerleading Mesostics. Hot threads, currently we have the hopelessly week 9 thread. Hopelessly lost this year has been quiet because I guess people aren't hopelessly lost in ModPo anymore. We need to shake it up. But this week, there are a bunch of people who are hopelessly lost, and they're all there in that thread. So go see them and hang out. Have a party, a hopelessly lost party. Second hot thread, Nick Montfort is here. That's actually the title of the thread, and he's great. So he is a Chapter 9.2 ModPo Plus poet who's a good friend of Writer's House, a good friend of ours, and he's in that thread. Nick Montfort is here. And there's one more I'll shout out, a hot thread. Is this still poetry? Which is revived from last year. We'll get to that in a little bit. Final announcement, Final Words webcast. So next week, a week from today, we will have the Chapter 10 webcast on the Chapter 9.3 webcast on the Week 10 poems. And then the following Monday, which is the final day of the active part, pre-Slow-Po part of ModPo 2017, is Monday, November 20th, and at 10:30, here in this room, we hope many ModPo people will be traveling from near and far to hang out with us. And after that, Anna is going to whip up some pizza and Chianti, and I have no idea, I'm making this up, but it'll be early in the day. And there can be a lot of ModPo people here. Please make plans to come. And there is a rumor that Davey's dad, Charles, is coming to Final Words. And what about Amber Rose's?
My mom, are you gonna come? No, I don't think she's watching today. We'll work on it.
It would be great to have not a reunion, but a union. It'll be fun. Okay, so Final Words, Monday, November 20th, 10:30. All right, so I'm going to list the poems that are in play today, but we have Erica Baum here. And this afternoon at noon, we had a poem talk in which Davey, we were participating, and Christine Nelson, the curator at the Morgan Library, and Erica and I talked about dog ear, and we began to realize that dog ear has a very close relationship to quasi-chance operations poetry and aleatory poetry. So it's great that you're here. And as you'll see when I start, bring up a first topic, it's so relevant to you. So we'll get started on. Let me just list the poems that are in play. A little excerpt from John Cage's Writing Through Allen Ginsberg's Howl, called Writing Through Howl. The several adages of John Cage, Jackson McClow's famous or infamous dance, performance, musical, poem composition that is made as an elegy to his and others' friends, Peter Innisfree Moore. It's called A Vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore, picking up a sub-theme of ModPo, which is about how you commensurately eulogize someone, particularly someone who's part of the avant-garde scene. Why would you write a standard obituary? And so McCloud comes up with something else. McCloud's Writing Through Tender Buttons, and we do Stein 100, the 100th of those. Jenna Osmond's Dropping Leaflets, which is an anti-war poem done in a kind of aleatory method out of anger in her office up at Temple University. Bernadette Mayer's Writing Experiments, I know we're going to talk about those. Joan Retallack's brilliant Not a Cage. Rosemary Waldrop's shorter American Memory of the Declaration of Independence, which is an N+7 poem. And for ModPo Plus, I'll add in the Nick Montfort stuff and Jackson McClow's Call Me Ishmael. We're also talking about Erica Baum's work. And here's where we're going to start. So Lydia Ostapiv, who's a wonderful ModPoer, in the Hopelessly Lost Week 9 thread, wrote the following, to which many of us replied. But I just thought I would ask Erica and then a couple of others, maybe because you guys have to go, Davey and Amber Rose. Let's talk about what Lydia's concerns are, okay? So here we go. She writes, I appreciate that McCloud's work is not arbitrary, that he had a well-thought-out plan, to say the least, and that Cage's approach is one of well-considered constraint. However, I feel I am being swamped by context rather than content. I understand that the experimental nature of each has to be explained and that the reader's role needs to be configured. However, I feel I am not being rewarded for my diligence. Now, this has been responded to by a lot of people, so Lydia is participating in that. But let's imagine that we're just reading that now. How, Erica, would you begin to respond to Lydia's concern?
Well, my immediate answer would be that the context is also the poetry, so you don't really have to, make an oppositional thing out of it. If you can be excited by that and consider that the poetry as well.
Context is content?
Yeah.
And it's true in your work?
Yeah. Yeah.
Taking dog ear, which we're going to talk about next week, how is context content in dog ear?
Well, I'm also operating where I kind of give myself constraints and I define a sort of approach, and then within that it frees me up. But the other thing is that the conversation you can have even just about the decision to proceed that way can open up a kind of poetics.
Right. Davey, your thoughts on this?
My thought for Lydia is that she's doing everything right. That's just like the feeling she's supposed to be having. And I think that that's the feeling out of which this work gets made, of feeling just like totally overwhelmed by context that's not available to you. Like you can't have adequate contextual information for everything that you would want to read in order to be able to read it in a sort of context. I think that that's something that ModPo is really ambitious about, of like how much context can we provide a little bit of context for a lot of things such that we can read all of them. And I think that that's why this work gets made. That's why a chance operation is useful. That's why something like dropping leaflets happens, or a reason why Not a Cage gets created, of just like, I'm never going to get through all of this text. I feel totally overwhelmed by this. I can't form a relationship to it. How else can I deal with it?
Yeah. Ambrose, I'm going to turn to you next. I remember a conversation when Susan Sontag, wow. Susan Sontag was here at the Kelly Writers House. She was a Writers House fellow. And we were sitting around at dinner, and a well-meaning professor of English said to her, what do you read when you want to read something easily? You just want to go from page 1 to page 100 and just, read. She looked at him with those laser eyes, and he was thus incinerated. What she said is, I don't want to read anything in which my reading practices are not disrupted. And the way that they get disrupted is because someone like Erica, who's producing the work, is making me think I am reading this thing that I am reading. It is not a transparently content-based piece of work. I have to think about the way I'm reading and how fast I'm reading, or how slow and how difficult. ModPo simply represents the instantiation of that in verse, in poetry, and it extends to photography when it disrupts reading practices. So Lydia is not saying, I don't want my reading practices disrupted. She's not saying that. She's just saying, I don't know how to get reoriented. I know I should have my reading practices disrupted, but I need a guide to what happens if it's entirely disrupted. What happens if the dog-eared page is completely blank, or you
did a series called Blanks, actually.
which didn't get into the dog-ear publication.
No, it's a different series, but.
So what happens if you push it all the way to the end and there really doesn't seem to be any content left? Where do you draw the line, et cetera? Amber Rose, how are you feeling about all this disruption?
Yeah, I think that to Lydia's question, and I guess to kind of tie together all of the things that the three of you just said. Wow, this close-up is so aggressive. Okay.
Wow, Zach, you got called. Back off, Zach. Okay. Back off. Every ModPo,
out of the corner
every still of every screenshot of a ModPo webcast is Amber Rose with the eyeglasses. That's it.
And it's these glasses. Okay. Anyway.
They're great. You rock those glasses.
Thanks. Okay. So Erica was saying that there's a blurred line between context and content. And I think that what Davey was saying about the feeling of being really overwhelmed last week made me think about something we were talking about last week, which is that everyone brings something to a poem, and that your experience of reading the poem, in addition to the content, in addition to the context, is all of what makes it a poetic experience.
And that's part of the context too, you're saying.
Right. So your experience and the frustration that you're feeling is actually informing the poem in a particular way.
Not overwhelm, you're saying, how can we not overwhelm with context? Because we're bringing a bunch of context.
Exactly.
That's
yeah.
so great.
So that and the word, like, that's where the word poetry can flip into poetics, because I think that allows us to maybe step away from what's supposed to be defined as the poem to the entire poetic experience that we're having engaging with the poem.
Joe Massey has got a great, it's not a total grin, it's just a sort of satisfied look on his face, hearing what Amber Rose just said. This aligns with what you like to think of as poetry to some degree. Joe, do you want to comment on any of this?
I just I love what everyone's saying. What I would say to Lydia is, to put it poorly, maybe try to accept that there's no escape from context, because context and content are, as Amber Rose is saying, or from what I understand what she's saying, what Erica was saying, it's they're totally inseparable. I mean, what would happen if you took context, there'd be no content, and vice versa. So
Perfect. All right, I want to go to Dylan Tweeney, of this roughly the same frame of mind. Dylan and I, he is a West Coast journalist of many, many years, and he's a wonderful ModPoer this year. And I want to read part of it. It's about Jackson McClose's vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore. And bear with me, it asks a question, and let's see if we can respond to it. All right, so Dylan writes, Professor Al's intro this week was encouraging, but I think the way he answers the imagined objection, anybody who's listened to my introduction to chapter 9.2, it's almost entirely defensive. That is to say, I'm saying, no, it's going to be okay, really, I know it's weird. I mean, it's not that bad, but I think the way he answers the imagined objection sort of missed the point. Thanks, Dylan. It's not that readers can't find beauty in randomness or inspiration in something created in a way that didn't involve the ego. It's a more ticklish question, which I think goes like this. What makes this poem so good? I felt that a little last week with poems like Silliman's Bart, where I found it very hard to read the whole thing. This week, in the intro to McClose's vocabulary, Al actually says, we're only going to listen to a bit of it. We do a 6-minute excerpt. It's almost as if once you understand the rules, you don't even need to actually read the poetry anymore, right? And I'm like, yeah! And he's like, what about the poem? And at that point, I feel like poets and readers have kind of lost the thread of what actually makes a poem interesting or good to read. Good to read is in quotes. And the related question I keep coming back to is, why are we studying this poem? Why do we think, say, Silliman's stream of consciousness about his BART ride is interesting, but we're not very interested in the stream of consciousness babbling coming out of a person actually sitting on BART next to us? I don't mean to be rude, but I feel I've missed a key step here. I wrote back to Dylan, we've had a really great conversation, in which I said, why assume that we're not interested in the sounds of the person sitting on BART? That's an assumption being made. Davey, you seem like you have a response to this. Do you? Am I wrong about your facial expression?
Yeah, I do have a response. I certainly have part of a response, and I imagine that collaboratively we have more of a response.
Yeah.
And I think that noticing that hinge between the instructions for the practice and what those instructions produce in the poem is really the hinge of week 9 between weeks 8 and week 10. That by the time we
Yes.
get to week 10, we are really thinking
So the
about...
language poets are not providing pages and pages of their procedure.
Yeah.
In fact, I think Silliman kind of hid the procedure from us. We had to kind
Sure.
of guess, right? We
Sure.
have to talk to Ron.
Yeah.
But Jackson was all about overwhelming you with process. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Right, where you get to the, like the Kenny Goldsmith work, and you are reading a procedure that is to the exclusion of the poem, basically. That really what's happening is the construction of the procedure. And I think of this piece as less in dialogue with that week 10 work and more in dialogue with something like Solowit's line drawings, work where the...
Sol LeWitt.
Yes.
Yep.
Where the iteration of it in space, so it's basically a set of instructions for a lot of different drawings that can be installed on large spaces. There are a bunch of them at MassMocha, and it's a beautiful space.
MassMocha, just to the east of Williamstown, Massachusetts.
Yes. And it's really exciting to see them in space, and the work of art is perhaps the relationship between what they're like in space and what the instructions are. And I would describe a vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore in the same way, that you're thinking not only about a work of art on the page as a poem is, but about the relationship between what was conceived of and what was produced, which is always true of poems. Poets are always imagining one thing and producing something a little bit different. And to be able to see that process happen in this poem, I think is really useful for going back and rereading other work earlier in the course.
Can I turn to Amaris and Erica Kaufman? Amaris and Erica, did you follow, you don't have the text in front of you, did you follow Dylan's concern enough to respond? Erica, you first?
It was cutting out a bit, but I got some of it.
Do you have a response? And you can pass if you want.
I'm going to pass.
Okay. Amaris, did you hear it?
Yeah, it's a complicated question. I guess the chance poets are calling upon us to redirect our attention, caged to the everyday ambient sounds and everyday sounds around us. So in that way, maybe that poem kind of is an encouragement to pay greater attention and not just be locked away on your phone in your transit ride. I guess the other thing I would say is to use the poem kind of as a tool to be more aware of the context and the subconscious biases that you bring to your reading every day. It's always good to be aware of that, but I guess it's easier to lose consciousness of it when you're reading a New York Times article or when you're reading a novel. It's much harder when you're confronted with something very opaque and you're much more conscious of putting your own intuition in yourself and doing the interpretation of the poem.
Yeah.
So I see that as the value of the chance poetry, is making you hyper conscious of where exactly your ideas and associations are coming into confrontation with the poem.
Well said. Thank you. We're going to switch to Jerry McNally talking this week in week 9 about Erica Baum's card catalogs and dog ear. It's a thread that was started a year ago, but Jerry came back to it, and a young person named Eves, who's actually Jake Marmer's student, responds. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, and then I want to ask Lily and Erica to respond, since this is about you. Okay, so Jerry is also a great ModPoer, and he doesn't really mean to be as negative as this thing sounds. He's just trying to grope around week 9. Is there a definition so wide that it contains both the classic poets like Shakespeare and the conceptual poets? Is there no point that once past, the text or image produced is not a poem and the creator not a poet? Now, this is under the Let's Discuss Erica Baum. So you're not mentioned, but not a poet. The image and text produced is not a poem and the creator is not a poet. Oh, photographer. I am not judging conceptual poets as inferior or even superior to classic poetry. I'm asking, is this still poetry? Is she a poet? And I'm just going to say what Eve says in response, and then we'll go to Lily and Erica. So Eve's took the course last year and is involved again this year, even though they are not in Jake's class. Honestly, I'm going to say it. I think this, your work, bridges the gap between art and writing. Really. This is the type of thing I wouldn't be surprised to see in an art museum. Well, you're in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. You're at the Whitney. You're at the Yale Art Gallery. You're everywhere. It's interesting, it's visual, and I would absolutely not be the same if you just typed out the words and laid them out in that shape. It is still wordy, meaning languagey. The meaning still comes from the words, so in that way it's writing and art, and what else can artful writing be than poetry? Does that make you feel good?
Yes.
Eves, you're good people out there, and so is Jerry for raising the issue. So Lily, what do you think?
I think that this is like absolutely the week that most brings this question to crisis, like what do we call a poem? But I think it's a line we play with like throughout ModPo even from the first week till now. It's just that like the last 2 weeks have really happened in our contemporary cultural context, right? But so like if you were a 19th century reader of Dickinson or Whitman, you would also be approaching their work and be like, is this a poem? Like, this is trash. I don't know
Really?
how to read this.
Really?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that again? I mean,
Yeah.
this is such an important point.
Right. So, like, if you're alive today, then you have like a cultural context for, the time period that we're dealing with here with the aleatory chance poetry. Even if you're an older person or a younger person, like more cultural context than you would have for 19th century work. But if you were a 19th century reader and you were reading Dickinson or Whitman, you would probably be asking a similar version of this question, like, is what I'm reading right now poetry? I don't think so, because it doesn't, what I think is a poem doesn't fit what Whitman is doing or what Dickinson is doing from that, like, 19th century perspective. So I think, like, that's what I always think of first when we get to this point in the course, because kind of goes back to what you're saying about challenging reading practices or making me question my practice for reading. Like, there is a cultural context for what reading practice is before it can be disrupted. So that's all I have.
No, I think it's a really great point. Erica Baum, and then I want to go to Erica Kaufman on this question.
I'm thinking of some of the things that have been said earlier, and just to go forward with that, you mentioned solo wit, and I was thinking that comment earlier about the bard and eavesdropping. It made me think about the way in which this conversation has gone on in art about framing. So if you think of Duchamp, and of course this leads to conceptual writing, but if you think about the idea of framing something that ordinarily we wouldn't consider art, and then you've introduced it as art, and think of it as kind of I don't know if circular is the point, or maybe spiraling, that you do that and then you open up, and maybe it's a dialectic, it just kind of keeps going forward. So every time that kind of question gets posed, it means we're kind of spiraling.
Yeah.
So
for the record, Erica Baum, you are in a course that had, in the main syllabus, it's like 83 poems. You've got 2 poems in a course of 83 poems on American poetry, and you're a photographer. I assume, I know, because we've talked about this, you welcome in being in that community, and think of yourself maybe often when you're doing a project as a poet. Yes?
Absolutely. I love poetry.
We should be all happy about that. And so how does this stretch the definition of poetry in a way that is for you positive?
How does
having you, one of the essential poets, and you're a photographer?
Well, I mean, I think the thing is that, again, to go back to this question of context, we're always, this is making something that would otherwise be transparent visible. So this is another way in which, I mean, in a sense, photography is doing something we all do. We all look. It's just framing a look. So.
And if we think of poetry, widening the definition as framing a look at some language that got written down, then it's the same kind of framing. Erica Kaufman, you are in Israel, is that correct?
I am.
What time is it?
It's late. It's 10:30 p.m.
Oh, it's not that late. How are things?
It's a long day.
A long day. Sorry. Thank you for joining us. How are things in
okay.
Israel? Are you doing some cool things affiliated with your work at Bard, I take it?
I am, yeah. I've been working in a couple of different schools and visiting classes, and it's been really, really great.
Did
and
you
the weather's amazing.
teach any ModPo poems over there?
Probably on Friday, I think I'll probably teach a ModPo poem.
Which one?
But, I think I emailed you about this. When I arrived, one of my colleagues, I didn't even know, but she's taking ModPo. Hi, Valerie. And the first thing she said to me when I arrived was, "Oh my God, I love Eileen Miles. I just assigned her to my students." I read her work for the first time in ModPo, and I just had to bring it in.
Yes.
So that was
That's
super,
great.
super exciting.
Eileen
for
will
me
be
to hear.
really happy to hear that. We should both tell her that happened. What were we talking about? Oh, we were doing this whole question of the definition of poetry, and Jerry's concern answered by Eve, right? About what gets to. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, my answer to that question always goes back to the idea behind the word poesis, which is to make something. So I think about poetry as less being about lyric form and more being about an opportunity to actually make something out of language.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so Davey and Amber Rose have to run, but as they're just about they're leaving, I'm going to pull something out of my hat here. And before you leave, just going to comment quickly on it, okay? All right, bear with me. This is going to take a second.
Oh, literally pull something out of your
Well, not my hat, but
Oh, still figuratively. But
this is...
Out of your office.
this is Lily's head.
Oh, Lily, are you right? Yes. This is a framed photograph that's hanging in my office. One day I was in Lower Manhattan having a drink, and Erica Bounds showed up. Actually, it was your husband, I think.
Yeah,
Showed up with a big bag, and inside was this fantastic print of my favorite page from
Card
catalog. And this is a photograph of the front of a card catalog. That 258 is weird. You know what that is? That's the 258th drawer in the catalog. And I just found out today that this photograph of a card catalog was taken in a library in Jersey City. So it's great. Okay, so there is a 2-word or 3-word poem, Davey, Amber Rose. And this is, I think of as a poem. I think of it as a kind of weird imagist poem, or some kind of languagey juxtaposition poem. Anyway, Davey, I know you wanted to get out of here and your mind is elsewhere, but what do you think? Do a close reading of this poem, this photograph.
I always want to talk about place, Al. I always have room for Jersey City.
This is you all over, isn't it?
Oh, it totally is. Yeah, I think that in terms of framing, this definitely operates as a poem because it's a way of bookending a set of language and taking the space between Jersey City and Jesus, which is meant to be just indexical space. Those just happen to be words, and locating meaning within those words. I think by taking them out and abstracting them and putting them in the context of like in the photograph, there's the impulse to think about them as having content rather than just being indexical. And when you start to think about the space between, I mean, this gets terrifying really quickly, especially in the week of an enormous church shooting, of thinking about place and religiosity, thinking about connections between location and belief, thinking about what you're indexing when you're thinking about a place. Are you also indexing a group of people, a set of beliefs, a set of practices, to think that there's a relationship between Jersey City and Jesus that's not just one of index, but one of meaning? There's a lot to generate there, and it's on the reader to do that generating.
So there's more than a few ModPo people out there who love every time Davey says brilliant things, but are also thinking, wow, he just overread this thing because Erica just found it and took a picture of it. Erica didn't write it,
That's the point,
and the
though.
librarians didn't even mean it. Because it just happened to be that the last card in the drawer was Jesus.
But that's the point, that the fact of that language existing is it's already in conversation. It's like taking that photograph is not starting conversation, it's noticing a conversation that already exists. It's
Amber
not,
Rose?
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go for it, yeah, go.
Because you guys have to go.
Davey's so deep.
I know, Davey's so deep. Do you want to add to that? Do you like this? This is crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm into it. It actually makes me think about in elementary school, I was in an AP library class. What is that?
Wait a minute. How could elementary
Not
school
AP,
have-
it was like advanced library or something. I don't know. Tracking is real. It starts very early. It was like special students library. I don't know. And we like had card
And did they have
catalogs.
card catalogs?
Yeah.
Wow, you're old.
Yeah. But so I'm interested in this dash. So the dash could be indexical, but I'm also thinking of the dash like interrupting. And I would, in the spirit of Bernadette Mayer, want to play with adding different punctuation. So if you did like Jersey City exclamation point, what would that do to the Jesus? Like Jersey City, Jesus.
Or how about,
Or
you add the exclamation point after Jesus.
right,
Jesus.
right, yeah, a question mark. You can do amazing
Jersey
things
City
with these
equals
words
Jesus.
Exactly. Jersey City, comma, Jesus? Question mark? Like, is Jersey City, like, do I get from Jersey City to Jesus?
Right.
Is that dash like
Actually,
a
that's the
trail
hope, yes.
to Jesus? Is that the conduit?
You know, it's funny because I was thinking about this when if I post on Facebook, if I'm like reacting to something, often I want to say Jesus, and then I don't always write that because I feel like, well, I'm not there to do the intonation to make it fit the, it's something I just say. I'm not really, to actually write that out.
It's tough.
It becomes a
to just write
different
Jesus,
thing.
It feels very holy.
And it's not at all my
you guys
intention.
go,
Yeah.
and I apologize for cutting you off. I'll let you guys go. Mandana is going to come to sit at the table, and I guess it's important. Joe, you're of a certain age. I guess it's important because the aforementioned Eves this morning by email said to me, I was born in the year 2000, so they are a senior in high school, right? So they were born in 2000, and therefore so Eve's never seen a card catalog, right? So I think it's important, Joe, for us to say, and then Erica, what's this thing about the card catalog, and why would Erica Baum, a photographer who is, it's a fairly early project, like your third major project, I think, why would a photographer-poet, be interested in the card catalog? Joe, any thoughts on that? And also, here's the here is the extra question. He who shall not be named as a noun, adjective. What does that have to do with aleatory poetry? There's another one. Okay, Joe, take it away.
Well, speaking as a poet, the card catalog is just pure nostalgia. I remember it well from elementary school, and I'm pretty sure I still know how to use one. So it's just it's sort of like space junk in a way. It's just kind of floating out there. It's weird. It's become weird, in its obsolescence.
Yeah. That's really cool. Does anybody, we're going to take a phone call. We have someone on the phone. Mandana, can you just add why, well, Erica has to do it too. Mandana, then Erica, and then the phone. Why would this artist be interested? What is it about the card catalog that makes aesthetic thinking possible?
Oh, gosh. Well, what you said earlier about the framing. The card catalog frames a beginning point and a terminal point, and nothing outside of those 2 points, but everything within those 2 points. So it's both a limitation as well as limitless possibilities.
Yeah. So in a way, it fits, even though you're a week 10 poet, it really fits as a week 9 poem because, for instance, N+7 has a cousin relationship to that. It's alphabetical. Or Nick Montfort's Constraint in The Exhaustion of Libraries, where it's an alphabetical poem. It's a poem of alphabetism or abecedarianism with that kind of constraint. So and this is one of your favorite pieces. Thank you for giving me a photograph of it. Thank you. I love it.
Well, I just want to, for the record, say that when I'll tell the story of how I first started working in the libraries. I had been doing another project earlier than that. I was in graduate school at Yale, and I was photographing blackboards, and I was going to classrooms and photographing in between class, looking at what was on the blackboard that and experiencing something where I would question what was this lecture about, and then enjoying the fact that that wasn't available to me, but I could only experience what was in between that. And then one day I was in the classroom, and they were all being taken over by high school students taking standardized tests. So I took my tripod and my view camera and my lights to the library and pulled open a drawer. And the reason I'm telling the story this way is that in my mind at the time, this was a quotidian thing that we all did. It wasn't a documentary thing. But then after I graduated, I continued doing that project. I really just started at the very end of my time at Yale. And I continued the project going to Jersey City, going to NYU, going to lots of libraries. It quickly became clear that digitizing was taking over and they were putting these aside. So I had to kind of embrace this sort of documentary aspect of it, even though really it was meant to be as familiar as anything else. But I also have to add that I sometimes think anything I touch
is going to become obsolete.
Yeah, because books, the whole question about ebooks, although I think that's changed a little, but blackboards and dry erase and all that, So, but really, I'm not running away from the word nostalgia because I understand that's part of the conversation, but it was not the case when I did the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we have a phone call, and this person is going to get a copy of Joe Massey's Illocality. So make sure, Anthony Lagana, that you take this person's address down. Okay, who is it?
It's Julie H. from France.
Julie H. from France. That's great. This book will take a while getting there. Hello, Julie.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good. I'm so glad that you called. Are you enjoying ModPo?
I am enjoying ModPo, yes.
Fantastic. Anthony is going to be arranging, actually it's Lily, who will send a copy of this book by Joe Massey to you. Sounds good? Maybe.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, Joe is not here, so he can't sign it for you, but maybe we'll figure out how to do that. So it's on its way. Do you have a question or comment?
Well, I wanted to take the opportunity, since she's there, to thank Erica Baum for her work, all of her work that we've seen, well, that we will see next week in ModPo, and as many others. This isn't my first year to try and follow along, although I usually get lost just about this week.
Oh, really?
But I love both the dog ears, but especially, as people have been saying, since I called about the card catalog, for those of us who are older, the card catalog was both a very vital part of our, I guess I should say, education throughout, at least for me, my college years.
Yes.
And I love the way that she recorded that. I did hear her say it wasn't nostalgic. I wasn't doing it for nostalgia.
Right.
But I still appreciate the fact that she did it, so that there is a record somewhere, because if she hadn't done it, maybe no one would have seen what was possible. And certainly I'm afraid to say that although I loved the card catalog and used it, I didn't see what she saw until she showed me
brilliant.
how to look for it.
That's great.
So I wanted, since she's there, I wanted to say that.
Well, why don't you stay on the phone so you can hear Erica respond directly to you. Erica?
Okay.
I so appreciate hearing that, because I think that I've learned to accept the idea that I'm a 20th century person as much as a 21st century person, and that the things I'm drawing upon come out of all the sort of technological material qualities that happen pre the digital age, which doesn't mean that we're not appreciating all the things that the way we're using technology now, obviously, or ModPo wouldn't exist. So I think that it's nice to talk about these things across technologies.
Yeah. Thank you so much for calling.
May I ask Erica a question?
Please do.
Which may or may not be addressed next week, but I haven't reviewed next week. When we're reading the card catalog poems, do we read from top to bottom, which is how the photograph shows us, or would we read from bottom to top, which is how the card catalog would show us?
Such a great question.
Great question. Well, it's interesting because that's one of the questions that we're always talking about, especially I find I'm always addressing that there's no one way to read it. But I will say there's one card catalog, which I'm not sure is available to you, but I think it is, Suburban Homes Subversive Activities. Does that ring a bell? Yeah. And that's an interesting one because of what's in focus and what isn't. And it works to me if I say Suburban Home Subversive Activities, and I think that the focus is a guide to that. But again, when I say what works, I simply mean what works for me in driving me to select it and present it. It doesn't mean it has to be working that way.
So,
Okay.
yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so in fact, we're allowed to find our own path.
Yes.
Yes, and this continues a conversation that we started last week, to some degree the week before, but mostly last week, which is that, and Erica talked about this earlier today, that in many, many ways, this work does make us co-creators of meaning because we're deciding how to read what we see, and Erica's okay with that, more than okay.
Right, I welcome that because it sort of brings more to it. Every time someone engages with it that way, it adds to it.
Julie, thank you for calling.
Thank you.
Just one last question.
Please, yeah.
She said she's okay with it, but is it what she intended from the beginning, or is it something she has discovered because of readers'
Well, I don't think
interaction?
I don't think that we can use the word intention that way exactly because I'm finding things. So when I find them, I'm sort of finding things that are resonant and then presenting them in such a way that they would open up that question.
Julie,
Okay,
if you
thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for calling and enjoy Joe Massey's book. If you turn your screen back on, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a page from Dog Ear, and Erica's going to read it. Zach, how am I doing with the angle? There we go. Erica's going to read it. Are you okay reading
Sure.
it? Okay. It's called Wild Tumult.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about it for a minute. And I'm going to ask Amaris, Joe, and Erica Kaufman to take a stab at reading it. I don't know if you guys can see it, but I know I also emailed this to you earlier. So, okay. And here's Erica Baum for the first time, at least in my hearing, reading Wild Tumult from Dog Ear.
Wild tumult of all things, inspected cannot be shown, does not the original painting general spirit sour from of.
Okay.
I never read it that way before, I'm just saying.
You want to read it another way?
Okay. Wild tumult of inspected, it's all things to be shown, cannot the original general does paint spirit so from.
Wow, okay. Amaris, years ago when we made these videos, you could whip out a close reading anytime. Are you able still to see the text? Do you have the text in front of you? Okay, you want to take a shot at the beginning of a close reading? And first of all, why close read a poem that was created by a photographer who flipped over a corner of a page and made an accidental meaning? Why do it in the first place? Tough question.
Well, I remember the first time I encountered these poems as well as card catalog. I got really revved up on them because it takes poetry out of your classical context of being in a book and puts it into your everyday world and kind of gets your creative juices flowing. So, with card catalog, you could think that's something with card catalogs have a purely functional value, but kind of excerpting them that way encourages you to be open to poetic possibilities in your everyday life. So when I read this particular one that we're looking at now, I did not read it at all the way Erica read it the first time, and I loved her first reading of it. And it seems to me kind of like a metaphor for poetry when she said, wild tumult of all things inspected. And it's maybe at first glance, a poem of this kind can seem very chaotic and very strange and opaque. But it's upon inspection, I guess, that it gets a flavor and a particularity. I thought it's kind of interesting to end on the sour of. So it's us that gives the flavor and the texture to the poem.
Great. That's a good start. Joe, what does it mean? Ha ha.
Well, what it means to me, and I love this piece, by the way, Erica.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to reading more of these Dog Ears. But it's similar to what Anne-Marie said. It reads to me every time I've read it today, and I've read it multiple times. It's like an Ars Poetica. The one clear phrase is, well, one of the very clear phrases at the very top of the piece, wild tumult of all things. And I read that as well as a commentary on language, because right after that colon, things start to break down. The context starts to swamp the piece, and I love that. I love that effect.
That's really cool. Erica Kaufman, any thoughts on this?
It's interesting because I read it also a couple of times today. And I read them as like mini right angles, like Wild Tumult of Inspected is in all things, in To Be Shown cannot be the original.
Yeah.
General paint spirit. And I didn't notice that it was sour. I thought it was Sue.
It's
not
not really sour.
She just read that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was an improv.
She does some improv on this.
But yeah, so it was just, Erica, I loved hearing you read it, and I'm also now thinking about a lot of the things that Joe and Amaris said, and really how even the way that I initially read it, it reads as an Ars Poetica. That was what I was thinking about too, because of the way the word inspected is working.
Thank you.
And I love the word spirit too towards the end.
Thank you. To me, I keep thinking about all the stuff that's going on between pages 198 and 199. There's a lot going on. Presumably this is prose, maybe a novel, right? Something pretty wild is happening, and there's a lot going on. And all I can think of is this is a really cool telescoping, viscerum-making reading strategy for skimming from 198 to 199. In other words, a poet or a poetry reader wonders, when I'm reading a novel, do I really have to read all of this plotty stuff? Can't I just have Erica Baum condense it for me? And it becomes Dickinsonian. In fact, Wild Tumult is like a Dickinson poem, the whole thing is. Do you want to say a word about it? And then we're going to move on. I think we have someone on the phone. No, we don't. We're going to move on to Bernadette Mayer's poetry experiments.
I do want to say about the Dickinson, I think Wild Nights makes me think of.
Yes.
And I love Dickinson,
Yeah.
so every
You
time
do
you
love
mention that, I'm
Dickinson.
happy.
You're a Dickinsonian.
I am.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, that sounds
The
a
next
little
time we do this course, we're
highfalutin,
going to
but
go
yes.
from Dickinson to you, Dickinson to Baum.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm going to read a selection of Bernadette Mayer's experiments and then invite anyone here to just comment on any of them. And those of you in the Google Hangout, if you can just sort of raise one finger up so I know to call on you. Here's a selection. Which of these are particularly generative for you? Which of these, Mandana, makes you want to get on the train, go home or the bus, and start writing? Okay.
I'll start writing right here.
Right here. You are writing. Journal of Answering Machine Messages, or voicemail. Right. Journal of Tenant-Landlord Situations. Write once a day in minute detail about one thing. Systematically eliminate the use of certain kinds of words or phrases from a piece of writing. Eliminate all adjectives from a poem of your own, or take out all words beginning with the letter S in Shakespeare's sonnets. Transform prose into poetic form. Experiment with writing in every person and tense every day, meaning all the persons, first person, second person, third person. Attempt writing in a state of mind that seems least congenial. That's like a classic Bernadette Mayer. Write on a piece of paper where something is already written or printed. That would be particularly interesting to you, and then take a photograph of it. Type out a Shakespeare sonnet or other poem you would like to learn about, imitate, double-spaced on a page, and rewrite it between the lines. Attempt to speak for a day only in questions. Write only in questions. That's hard to do, by the way. Write household poems about cooking, shopping, eating, and sleeping. Also a Bernadette Mayer specialty. Write 25 or more different versions of one event. Okay, Erica, which one particularly, and you I assume teach with this stuff, so which one is particularly exciting and why?
For me, I like the tenant-landlord ones. Because it's just not stuff that's in my normal wheelhouse. Like for myself, I gravitate towards the things that I don't do in my regular practice.
Yeah.
And then for teaching, like the eliminating a part of speech, I find to be really, really useful. She has, there's one, I forget that's just kind of taking notes and taking notes and taking notes, and then you construct something. That's another one that I think is really useful for teaching.
Great. All right. Lily, any of those really appeal to you? A lot of them, probably.
Yeah, I like Well, I really like the rewriting something between the lines as like a show of the playfulness of the writing of the experiments, as well as like conceptually playful. So if you think about like a sort of a stock thing of being in a literature class of like you have to read between the lines. It's not just literally what the person says. And then the sort of joke of the exercise is like, well, now you are writing what's between the lines,
Right.
but then you're actually taking it seriously as writing. But one, just what I like in general about the Bernadette Mayer's experiments is one that you didn't read starts with systematically derange the language. And so I like that as sort of a motto for this kind of writing experiment in general, and the concept of derange the language, meaning like literally unarrange it,
Yes.
but then also derange it, like make it very
Crazy.
strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy
So-
in quotes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a motto for ModPo.
Yeah.
You know.
Systematically derange the language.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Joe Massey, do any of those appeal to you as a poet who writes every day?
Yeah, definitely attempt writing in a state of mind that seems least congenial, because congenial states of mind come to me maybe once a month. So it's and I like how it turns on its head the idea of poet, waiting for divine inspiration to strike her, like a lightning bolt, which is really a bullshit idea.
Right, and Bernadette Mayer, if she ever wrote a poem in a congenial frame of mind, she'd probably throw it out. I mean, I think there's a great tradition of this. I think the instruction manual by Ashbery, it's funny, but I think it's an attempt to do that, to say, I am so mad at this stupid job, I think I'll go to Guadalajara, I'll write a poem. There's this sort of bad boyness quality or bad girlness quality. Erica, did any of those appeal to you?
Yeah, I really liked the last one. It made me think of Rashomon. It made me think of Raymond Queneau and Exercises in Style.
Right, 25 or more different versions of one event. Why not?
It's really fun, and it sort of gives you the opportunity to really play.
Yeah, good. Mandana?
One of them I actually do a lot, which is to write on a piece of paper that already has writing on it. A lot of times in the theater, I like to take the playbill insert out, and what I'm thinking about in the theater, I write it on that, and it's a reminder. Or I write letters on it to people, and they can see what's already on it. So something about there already being writing on there frees me up a little more.
Yeah. I want to make a pitch for, this is a moment where I can make a pitch for Mesostics. Even if you're not doing all the 4 essays of ModPo, go to the Mesostomatic, or I forgot what we call it, the Mesostic poem generator, and put a seed text in, and just see what you can do in rewriting things. Zalil Ben Chimol took a ModPo Plus poem, Postcards, by Ray Armantrout, which is a really great poem. I'm going to read it. And then produced a remarkable dream. The oracle or seed text is the spine text, is dream, D-R-E-A-M. And what happened when Zalil put this in is that the dreamy quality of this neo-imagist poem by Ray Armantrout comes out. Zalil brought it out. So here's the famous, for us at least, famous Ray Armantrout poem. Man in the eye clinic rubbing his eye. Too convincing, like memory. My parents' neighbor's house, backlit at the end of their street. So you've got, kind of imagistic juxtaposition of 2 scenes, and what Ray is doing there is she's almost commenting on the first one first, saying, I don't know if that's going to be good enough for a poem. Let me try something else. And what Zalil did is, by running dreaminess through it, by the word dream, came up with this dreamy version of it. And he didn't need to be, quote-unquote, original to do it, but something new came of it. And I'm sure Ray Armantrout wouldn't have a problem with it. And in fact, she'll see it on Facebook because I posted it, and if she has a problem with it, she'll tell us. In clinic eye memory, parents, at the end of man eye clinic, rubbing his eye, too convincing. My parents' house backlit at the end of their street, man eye convincing like memory at. It's a much more circular, everything happening at once poem. It's really new, I think. We have a phone call. We'll take the phone call, and then Lily and I are going to, this will be the last call, and Lily and I are going to look into Twitter and the subforum, the thread, and start picking up a few questions from there. So, Anthony, who do we have?
We have Maria M. from Pennsylvania.
Oh, Maria. Okay. Well, she's going to get a copy of Joe Massey's book. Maria?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Al. Hi, everybody.
Wait a minute. Is this Maria? The Maria?
Markovic.
Fantastic. You're going to have a copy of Joe Massey's poem, Illocality.
Great.
Do you want one?
Great. Yes, I would love one. Thank you.
Okay, Joe's smiling now. He was worried that you would say, nah, I'm not interested in that, Joe Massey. All right, so Anthony is going to make sure we get your address. Okay, do you have a comment or question, Maria?
I have two about Erica and her poetry. I'm enjoying you being here today, and also enjoying reading your poetry. My two thoughts are there's sort of two distinct ideas that I wanted to bring up, and the first is that with the imagery, where you have words and an image together, and we're looking at them as a poem. It's interesting to me because I think in a typical poem, a word is the only thing that suggests the image, and you have to create the image. You're required, I guess, to create the image, or you're not required, but maybe the normal way the human mind works is to create the image in one's own mind related to a particular word. So it's interesting to me here that the image is there as part of the poem, and the individual's mind doesn't have to create that part of the poem. And I was thinking that might also be interesting to think about the poem using the words themselves, card catalog, for example, and just what does the poem look like when you don't have an image, just to better understand what the image adds to the poem.
That's really great. Erica, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've seen it written out. I mean, I think Kenneth Goldsmith does it in his introduction to the book. He does a reading of one of the poems, and he writes them out. So you're just looking at the words. And I guess he did that to talk about the words, and it's a different experience. I mean, as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that one of the things I love about reading is that kind of all the things that you can imagine. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want you to be so anchored to the visual qualities of these pieces that you lose all those possible things that you would get in reading. So kind of, maybe I'm asking you to read it and look at it and then read it again and then look at it and then read it again. And, maybe you have to kind of keep going back and let those different things happen. And maybe they merge, but they shouldn't, one shouldn't dominate.
Great. How you doing, Maria?
I'm doing great. Doing great, Al.
Are you?
And
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to. The other thing I wanted to mention was with the dog ear poems. I think there's an interesting relationship between chance poetry and the dog earing and orthogonal thinking. I had the thought many times when I was reading the chance poetry that the beauty of it, or what I enjoy the most about it, is it causes me to think about different disparate things in different ways, because by chance you're putting together words that wouldn't necessarily naturally be juxtaposed, and that is a launching point to a type of, I guess it's called orthogonal thinking. And in the case of the dog ear poems, where you're actually creating right angles, that's another aspect of orthogonal thinking. I guess it relates to right angles, things intersecting at right angles, and it's interesting to me that Erica's dog ear poems are creating right angles.
They are, really, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very keen observation. Maria, thank you for calling. Erica's going to answer the question, and if you hang up, you can turn up your volume on your computer and listen to her response.
Thank you so much.
How far away are you from Writer's House?
Oh, I'm just about I'm 25 miles northwest of the city. I actually got dressed up with my coat on, planning to come in today, and then I thought, you know what, I think I'll just avoid the traffic coming home and
that's
log on from home.
the sad thing about an online
Yeah.
course is you don't have to go through traffic. But I hope you'll come to our final words party on the 20th.
I will try to come.
Okay,
Thank
it'll
you
be
for
great.
inviting
All
me.
right, thank you for the questions too. Bye-bye. Erica, you want to answer that? And then we're going to look into the tweets, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking about chance. I'm thinking of a card catalog that I did that says, the way I would read it, it says, fasts and feasts, fatalism.
Yes.
And in a way, it's like I'm saying, I'm going to leave it to this situation to yield, and that's the chance that there's this sense that in this case, there's the alphabetized or Dewey Decimal System devised system that arranges things, and I'm going to sort of leave it to chance that I pull open a drawer and things will be revealed. And the fatalism is a little bit like saying, it's like faith fatalism. I believe that there is something there, but I don't actually know. And it's kind of fun. Like, I like devising these situations that I'm going to keep exploring, and I like feeling like there's an infinite thing to explore. And it is a kind of faith that there's something there, and I don't really know, because the whole point is you can't predetermine it.
Right.
So that's the indeterminacy that's the fun of it.
And again, I'm so interested in how bringing you into week 9 makes you more of an aleatory poet. I mean, that's a stupid thing to say, but
I'll hang out in week 9.
Yeah, you can hang out with me. I mean, just that kind of connection really makes this stuff come together. Mm-hmm. What does it mean? What does quasi-intentional chance operation poetry mean? It means that we're pulling out of what used to be thought of as fully intended meaning, which of course is not possible, fully intended meaning, because language meaning is slippery. It extracts from that a full consciousness that what we're doing is not something we're completely in control of. So when you go to card catalogs and you snap pictures and you realize, I found that, wow, that was there. I didn't make that. I just found it. That's really a different way of thinking about art. Okay, so Lily and I are going to go back and forth for a few minutes. You're going to quote some tweets. I'm going to quote a few things in the forum, in the thread, and then we'll pick one or two to talk about. So you want to pick a few tweets?
Yeah, I have 2 specific ones that I picked that I think are good. One relevant to what you just said, Al and Erica. Terry Talty says, card catalogs are aleatory. How many cards fit in one drawer is by chance. Do librarians choose the number of subjects that are carded? So the answer being no. So it is aleatory because the drawer is only so big, and it just happened to be that
Jersey City to Jesus. Yeah.
And then the other one I wanted to read was a question from Sheila, which I think we can ask Erica specifically, but then I think it would be an interesting topic to bring into aleatory poetry from this week in general, which is, why did Erica Baum photograph that card catalog drawer specifically? She says, and not Jesus to Jonah, for example, which, like, the answer to that part of the question would just be that you, Erica, I'm assuming you just photographed, that's what it said that day, is Jersey City Jesus. But I think the idea that there were probably other cards that didn't seem as interesting to photograph, maybe, or like, what is the thing that motivates you to make Jersey City Jesus and not another drawer photograph?
Yeah, I mean, there's a subjective action going on with the decisions I make, what I'm choosing.
Right.
The question really isn't even, why did I photograph that? Because I photograph a lot more than I ever show. And so it's really more about editing and selection and thinking, and then kind of a sensibility that I think evolves over time through the engagement with all this material. So the decisions about what I'm choosing I've become a little bit more conscious of them as I go along.
Right, and it's something we see, like, it's a question the reason I say, like, aleatory poetry the whole week in general, too, is, like, it's a question we could ask of McClove's work or of John Cage's work, too. Like, there is subjective choice being made while at the same time a distancing of ego from the work. So where it's almost like as a reader, if you want to, like, to say hold the poet accountable sounds like a bad thing is happening, but more just like if you want to know why the poet made the choices they made, it sometimes can be hard to know when to like intervene. It's like,
Yeah, good point. Let me just refer to two of the comments in the thread, and then I'll open it up to anyone who wants to respond to either of them. So Marcus Balassi, our friend, the poet we met in London, writes, to what degree is this chance poetry exactly the same as normal poetry? How much control do we really have over the poems that we write? Why do we choose the subject we choose? Where do the words come from? This is what we were just talking about, right? This kind of poetry casts new light on, quote unquote, normal poetry. Why do we like the bits we like and discard others? Al has said that aleatory poetry questions the myth of genius. I think it is honest in abandoning the notion that one deliberately writes a poem, and is in charge of selecting every word. Both ways of writing are a dance with possibility, but chance operations don't try to hide that fact. So that's one thing that any of us could comment on. And the other is from Laura Zinker, who's very excited about the Week 9 poems. And by the way, I noticed that a lot of ModPo veterans who abandoned in Week 9 in previous years seem to have stuck through Week 9, so we're getting kind of a resurgence this week, which is usually the opposite of what happens. Yay, yay. Laura writes, the aleatory poetry we've been reading this week has had a surprising effect on me. It's changed not only the way I'm looking at words in poetry, but how I'm listening to all words all day, in conversations I'm part of, in conversations around me, on the radio, on television, in whatever I may read. In fact, I'm reconsidering not only all written words that I encounter, but how we humans communicate all the time. So I wonder if a couple of us, maybe Erica Kaufman first, can respond to either of those comments. Erica?
The last one that you just read really struck a chord because I think that's one of the amazing things about the poems that we deal with this week is that even though one might refer to them as being generated via chance operations, what the chance operation actually does is it opens you up to paying sustained attention to the way that language is working in ways that you wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah.
So the chance, makes you notice things that one doesn't normally notice.
That's great. Thank you. Amaris, do you have a comment on either of those comments?
Yeah, I guess all the poetry this week takes the emphasis off this idea of conscious creation of poetry and places the emphasis more on the interpretation of the poetry. So of course there's still a creative act there. Erica Baum is creative because of selected certain things. But I kind of also wanted to respond to what Maria was saying, the difference between having the image there to provide the context and just having the text on paper. To me, as a reader, I think it opens you more to playful interpretations of the poem when you realize that it's just an act of chance. It's just the fact of your attention lending meaning to that poem. And the idea of seeing poetry and language differently in your everyday life.
Yes.
So all these poems, it's not about, the perfected, construction of words on a page. It's just about how you decide to train your attention on those words and give them meaning.
Nicely said. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to get final thoughts from everyone. Anything you want to say about this week? A shout out to a poem that we didn't talk about. In fact, there were a lot of them. Any cheerleading for next week? Anything you want to say? So why don't we start with Joe Massey, then we'll go to Lily. Joe, final thoughts today?
Well, I've loved the conversation. Thank you, Erica. I look forward to digging into more of your work. And I'll just say that my office hour is at 7 p.m. Eastern time tonight, in with just a few hours. So hope to see you there. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks so much. Lily, final thought?
Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to people who are struggling generally as we've made this turn in the course towards chapters or weeks 8, 9, and 10, just to say that I admire people who really stick with something that challenges them in general, and especially in this massive open online course where there's no one saying like you have to do this for credit or whatever. Just what Al said about longtime ModPo people who sort of have disliked this section of the course or for whatever reason haven't gone all the way through it, sticking around this time. Just shout out to you guys.
Thank you so much. Mandana, final thought?
2 thoughts, if that's okay. So this is the 6th year I've been to this point, and this time I have a lot of different feelings about this particular week. The first thing that I was thinking about listening to you all talk is, does art have to be enduring to be art? Can it just be something artistic that we won't be reading 200 years from now, and that doesn't have that sort of meaning? And I suggested yes. And something that you were saying earlier, Erica, is the point the poem, or is it, which is a static thing, the poem never changes, or is it our continual conversation with that poem, which is never the same? And I think this week really emphasizes that for me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Erica Baum, final thought?
Well, I just wanted to mention the Jenna Osmond dropping leaflets,
yeah.
just because I feel like it's an interesting thing for everyone to visit and revisit. And we're in a moment right now where we're thinking about this year and last year, and that referenced other key things in the past, recent history. And just that, in a way, in light of what you just said, that the conversation changes, and we keep bringing these new moments to those things. So I think that's an interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anne-Marie's final thought?
Yeah, I think maybe this week is particularly troubling because it disrupts our classical idea of the poet as being, a brilliant genius working with pen and paper. But especially in our day and age where things are increasingly getting automated, we tend to think that creative labor is safe, whereas manual labor is not. But here, there's a formula with Nick Montfort, there's algorithms that are generating poetry, and increasingly where we come into play is, I guess, in the interpretation of the poetry. If, going with what Mandana was saying, maybe the poetry has significance or value if it resonates with us. So it's not in the sense of a canonized, the whole culture decides that these poems have enduring value. It's kind of the idea of taking something that was the product of chance and deciding if it has enduring value for you personally.
Yeah, thank you, Maurice. Erica Kaufman in Israel, final thought?
Thank you, Mandana, and hi, Mandana. My final thought is really about how interesting it is. Last year, I remember this webcast very distinctly because it was the morning after the election, and I was quite distraught. And, a year later, I feel like once, it's interesting to come back to these same poems a year later and think about the way that they help us understand that language can actually do something, and that language and the way that you interact with it changes as time passes.
Boy, oh boy, I had forgotten that webcast on the Wednesday, week 9 Wednesday.
Wow.
I had forgotten it momentarily, but it was quite a... And it's available on YouTube, so if you want to go back and relive that commiseration, you're welcome to. It'll be there forever as long as YouTube lasts, which might not be much longer. Anyway, my final thought. I had a long conversation with a young person who is convinced that they are not beautiful. We've all had conversations with people, and unfortunately, often young people. And it never struck me at all that this person was not beautiful. But that's okay, that's not the point. The point is that this person felt unbeautiful. And it was kind of a long conversation, and we've had these conversations. People who are not happy with themselves think of that. What is beauty, right? Okay. Anyway, and I was reading to prepare for today, and I came across The Adage by John Cage, which is really about aesthetics, but is related. The first question I ask myself when something doesn't seem to be beautiful is, why do I think it's not beautiful? And very shortly, you discover that there is no reason. And it seems to me, quite aside from the spiritual low morale of of a person not thinking that they're beautiful. There is this idea that beauty is, okay, arbitrary, but that almost makes it sound capricious and irrelevant. No, beauty is relevant. It's just that when we say something's not beautiful and are pressed to say why it is, our logic starts to fall apart. And it turns out to be another imposition of our subjectivity on something else. And since what we're doing now is putting forward and making very, 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 very conscious the apparatus of our impositions of framing, to put it the way Erica has in the last hour, you begin to examine those framing processes and you realize that beauty is what's framed a certain way. And Cage is really good at asking these profound questions, and he's actually trying to help with a lot of other people further a revolution in the way we think about what's beautiful and what's not. And this started with modernism, and even with Dickinson and Whitman. Whitman saying, I whatever is lowest and commonest is me. Dickinson looking at the shards and bits via Susan Howe, as we see it, of her life. All the detritus and fragmentation of the early modernists, the thorny stem rose of HD. We've come such a long way, but we're still facing this kind of non-progressive dilemma of thinking that something is ugly and something is not. And one of the things that Erica Baum does so well is she points her camera towards stuff and says, I bet you didn't think of this as beautiful. You know, no one comes into my office without looking at that photograph and saying, Jersey City to Jesus, you know, it's not ironic. And then all the people of Jersey City realize that they're beautiful. Anyway, that's my final thought. Okay, Lily, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mandana,
Thank
always
you.
great to have you here. And at the table, it's true that a couple people had to bail to get you at the table, but no, I'm kidding. Long time. Yeah, and you still are beautiful. Amaris, thank you so much. Always great to hear your wisdom. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. Joe Massey, you're the best. There are going to be 2 new readers of Illocality coming, and well, one's going to take a month by boat probably to get the book there. But thank you, Joe. Stay warm. Erica Kaufman, are you in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem?
I'm in Jerusalem now. I was in Tel Aviv today.
Oh, wow. Back and forth. Well, if you get back to Tel Aviv, you know, hop in the ocean. I imagine that it's
I will.
nice swimming. I think I've said goodbye to everybody there. And last but not least, Erica Baum, thank you for being part of the ModPo community. Thank you for being such an amazing artist.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks.
all of you. ModPo is amazing.
Thank you for hanging out with us. And at 6 p.m., which is an hour and a half, a little more than an hour and a half from now, if you go to the Writers House website, right, go to the Writers House website, just type Kelly Writers House in any search engine, and then click on, help me, Chris, KWH-TV, which is on the front page. Click on KWH-TV, so it's not the same link as this webcast. And you will, at 6 o'clock, you'll see Erica Baum and me talking more about her work. 6 o'clock tonight. Otherwise, many of will see you in the forums, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Does anybody know what time the webcast is next Wednesday? Zach's thinking maybe 11:30 a.m. Really? That's a weird time. I don't know about that. And then final words. Webcast. We're inviting everybody to come to Philly. I know the DC people, the Washington people are showing up, and some New York people maybe on the 20th, and we'll all be here at 10:30 a.m. So signing off from, wait a minute. Anthony, thank you for dealing with the phones. You were great. We missed Anna today, who had to do some work at Temple University. Chris Martin and Zach Gardner, I have to say something. You know, a lot of people take for granted that we pull this off. There isn't really another MOOC who's really doing this right. There might be one other, the guy in Michigan, Dr. Chuck Severance. But yeah. But generally speaking, what we're doing is kind of miraculous, and you guys are the reason why we're able to pull it off. So thank you to Zach and Chris, and we'll see you around the forums. Bye-bye.